I'm Andrew Johnson, and I'm representing the CU Boulder project team. And so I want to thank the project leads for the opportunity to be a part of this pilot and also to have the chance to present to you all today about how it went for us. And so I think I wanted to start with our project team slide to show kind of the um, the breadth of the people involved. And we had kind of a large group of people that we pulled together when we were putting our proposal together for this pilot. And that was kind of led by the Center for Research Data and Digital Scholarship here at CU Boulder, which is a libraries and research computing formal campus collaboration. And so three of us, myself, Matthew Murray, and Adi Ranganath, are the folks on campus who do most of the consultations around data management plans, helping researchers write and improve those. We also oversee data curation support in our institutional repository. Our team is led by Thea Lindquist, so she's one of the executive directors of CRDDS. And then Barb, Layla, and Shelley represented the research computing side of CRDDS, and Shelley's the executive director on that side. Barb and Layla do a lot of support for HPC infrastructure, large scale data storage, secure data storage, things like that. Then we also had a group of folks from the libraries who were kind of not part of the Center for Research Data and Digital Scholarship. And Vita and Sam were on board. They support the IT side of our repository, our institutional repository, where we house over 2,300 data sets to date. And then Jamie is the assistant dean that oversees that part of the library. So she was involved from a leadership perspective. And then as in terms of other campus partners outside of the libraries and research computing, we wanted to bring in sort of a group that had a more disciplinary focus. And also CU Boulder is the largest recipient of NASA funding for all public universities. So we wanted to try to focus on something that had a tie to NASA funded research as well. And so we reached out to the Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics, and we were excited to be joined by Doug Lindholm representing that group as part of our team. And then we had a colleague, Karen, who's one of the research administrators on campus in our Research and Innovation Office. And so Karen came on board to represent that sort of research office perspective and also to help us with some of our goals around getting access to data management plans and evaluating what that kind of workflow and pipeline looks like for all grant proposals across campus. And then finally, we brought in a couple of folks from our faculty information system, which is the group that oversees our faculty profile system, CU Experts, our sort of research information management system, which is called CU Boulder Elements, and does a lot of the kind of research information tracking work across campus, which was key to several of our goals. So next slide, please. So as you can kind of see from the folks who make up our team, we all brought these different goals and specific to our units to the project, and they kind of fell into three large categories, which we had from the outset. And then a lot of the really interesting work of the pilot was kind of starting to go down the paths of each of these goals and seeing where we ran into some barriers, some expected, some unexpected, and then where we were kind of able to have more success, which informed the direction of the pilot work, as I'll describe later. But generally, from a high level, the three categories of goals we had were things around alerts. So this, as the other pilots have already kind of mentioned, has to do with trying to get a better sense in terms of resource allocation and planning and things like that of who is writing CRDDS resources, so our repository, large scale and secure data storage, HPC infrastructure, which PIs are writing those into proposals that then get awarded. And yeah, and then some more kind of specific speculative alert ideas around secure data in particular about tracking that throughout its life cycle. We also wanted to kind of leverage DMSPs to better track research outputs associated with grants to help with public access policy implementations. And then finally, and this was kind of the goal we did the most work on, as I'll describe, we were looking to integrate information related to awarded DMSPs in two directions with other systems on campus. So again, our faculty profile system and our research information management system. So using those systems to improve the quality of DMSPs, and then and vice versa, using DMSPs to feed back into those systems. Next slide, please. Some of our specific activities that we did to try to make progress on those goals were we explored the workflows and pipelines for getting access to all the pre and post award DMSPs on campus. We've been in the kind of DMP game since 2011, and we did a whole bunch of work at the campus level in those early days, but it had been a long time since we'd done kind of a whole scale look at all of the processes around DMPs across campus. So this pilot gave us a great opportunity to kind of reassess where things are now with those. So that was some important work that we did there and learned some lessons. We also evaluated a lot of the possibilities around creating alerts and what we could potentially do based on what we learned from the first step in terms of accessing DMPs. We used two large projects to use as kind of exemplar case studies to try to make like high quality DMSPs and see what sources of information we needed to do that. One of those was NSF funded and one was NASA funded. And we did a lot of work around assessing kind of the existing sources of data that could feed into DMSPs and then how DMSPs could integrate with those and with other campus level systems. And then at the very end, we did a little bit of preliminary testing of the DMP tool API to try to automate some of these integrations. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but this was one of the results of our kind of uh, landscape analysis of all the different sources of data, both internal and external to CU Boulder, where we could find a lot of the information that we wanted to machine actionably connect to DMPs and to other systems. And so we found a lot of these were, kind of only partial sources and they weren't really connected in any formal ways. But we did have some starting points where we had a pretty solid and complete connection from our perspective, from the information that we were looking for. Next slide, please. And so that helped us to kind of do a gap analysis and see where we could potentially work on finding solutions to improve these connections. And so we got some ideas for those, and we're starting to kind of go down the road of improving those connections. Next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned, we were working with LASP for two reasons. One was kind of the NASA funded aspect, but the other was that they have their whole kind of own data infrastructure within their large research institute, which has missions, across the entire solar system. And we wanted to see how their kind of local data infrastructure could potentially leverage machine actionable data management plans to meet their needs, but then also connect to the campus systems. And so this is just, again, a high level overview of their infrastructure with some goals about how that might connect to the campus work. Next slide, please. So I think some of the most interesting parts of a pilot project like this are like really kind of running into and identifying where you hit some barriers in this work, and that's helpful for understanding which directions are potentially fruitful and which are things that might need to be reevaluated. And so one of the things we found out right away was that it's still very difficult and labor intensive to obtain any DMPs on campus, which are the vast majority that are not created in the DMP tool. We need to get like permission from each individual PI to access these plans. And so that was really kind of a difficult workflow to envision as something that we could do at scale. And so that changed some of our ideas around how we could potentially generate alerts for when some of our resources are mentioned in DMPs. We also, from the kind of small subset that we got, saw that a lot of the content in these DMPs was not super useful anyways. It didn't go to the level of specificity of naming specific resources. We do have some DMPs that are created in the DMP tool, and so theoretically could be more active and returned to by PIs, but it doesn't seem like that's actually happening in practice. So we need to either do outreach around that or probably more likely be the ones to actually be updating these plans, hopefully in an automated way. We ran into a kind of a specific barrier around regulated and secure data. Some of the goals around the alerts there, we realized that those would need to be in a system that was as secure as the data itself. And so that was an important finding, but one that kind of was outside of the scope of the pilot, and we're going to keep in mind as we go forward. And then one of the particular connections that is super important that we found was really difficult to actually find kind of in the wild was tying data sets directly to grants. So if you found a data set, often it was impossible, or you had to know an associated article to get back to the grant. Next slide, please. Um, yeah, so from these, beyond these barriers, we did get a lot of kind of important information and takeaways that are informing our next steps. We obviously know that collaboration, based on our project team, is super important across campus for this, and that we need to improve those connections. We have a much better understanding of how maDMSPs could help us improve our research information ecosystem. We have certainly, as the diagrams I showed demonstrate, we have a much better awareness of the gaps where we need to improve connections and integrations. And then I think importantly, without any mandate to use the DMP tool or to create machine actionable data management plans, we're really going to have to focus on showing PIs what the value of this is to them. And so we got some ideas there. Next slide, please. And then I'll wrap up just by talking about some of our next steps. So we are still working, and we're excited to continue the work beyond this pilot. One of the things we're doing right now is producing kind of a final report and recommendations, since we had so many groups on campus involved, for a campus audience based on the lessons learned and some potential recommendations there. We're also updating all of our institutional DMP tool guidance and templates to integrate the lessons that we learned, potentially use those as a first step in creating the alerts that we were looking for use of our resources, some specific questions pertaining to those resources. And we've also begun already enhancing our kind of data curation workflows in our institutional repository to improve what we're actually putting into the data site metadata, and kind of enhancing that to specifically create better connections in the wild between data sets and grants. So making sure that grant IDs are in that data site metadata for all of the data sets in our repository. And then, of course, we want to continue the cross-campus conversations and collaborations. And so this was a great kind of jumping off point to get those going again.